Sometimes when you watch horror or dark anime, you basically expect to be scared or creeped out in some way. So you end up mentally bracing yourself for the eventual scare or darkness that will be thrown your way. However, if a scare or uneasiness comes from a supposedly lighthearted anime, it hits you 10 times harder because you're not prepared for it at all. And for me, that happened to me in the anime Majo no tabitabi, or The Journey of Elaina. The Journey of Elaina follows the story of Elaina who has this dream to travel the world because of all the storybooks that she used to read as a child. But in order to travel, her mother gave her a condition that before she can travel the world, she must become a witch. Some time has passed, and she becomes an apprentice witch, with no problems. But in order for her to complete her training, she needs to be trained by an actual witch. So Elena starts training under Flan, a witch from another country. Because all the other witches in Elena's country don't want to train her because she was the youngest person to ever become a witch apprentice. Maybe they don't want to raise more competition for themselves, who knows? Little did Elena know that Flan was actually hired by Elena's parents to put her down a peg, so she doesn't get conceited. But it turns out Elena wasn't conceited at all. So Flan decides to give her a different lesson instead, which was to fix Elena's tendency to endure in most of her situations, by letting her do chores like Karate Kid, with none of the learning karate part. In this case, magic, until she eventually complains that enough is enough. And the show gave us the lesson that sometimes it's okay to voice our dissatisfaction with a certain situation, and enduring it is not always the right thing to do. Okay, so why am I starting with this lighthearted part of the story, you ask? It is to put in contrast to what's going to happen next. After another lighthearted story where this time Elena was placed as the role of the mentor, she travels to another country and happens to cross a beautiful flower field, where she meets this young girl that asks her to bring a flower bouquet with her, so that its beauty will be appreciated. So Elena agrees because why not, right? After she reaches the gate of the city, she was stopped by a young guard, who after seeing the bouquet, became restless and asked where Elena got the bouquet. But they were interrupted by an older guard, who explains that the flower that she is holding is actually poisonous to non-magic users, and hypnotizes anyone that comes in contact with them. So Elena recalls that there was a plant like that in one of her storybooks, where the plant mutates and gains consciousness, and then after, lures humans for sustenance. Elena went back to the flower fields before she left for another country, out of curiosity perhaps. And the young guard that stopped her from the night before is there clinging to a giant flower, and Elena realizes that it was the young girl that gave her the bouquet. Elena tries to intervene but realizes that it's too late for the young man because the plant has already consumed most of his life energy. And she leaves the flower field and heads to another country, and the story ends with a shot of many more people enchanted by this flower, slowly but surely making their way towards town. This story almost had a Junji Ito-like vibe to it, where we don't get to see the conclusion of what happens to the city, and it felt surprisingly scary. For a show that up until this point was presenting itself as a lighthearted show, it came out of nowhere for me. But more I thought about the theme of the show itself, it started to make sense. Elena grew up reading fairy tales, and she references stories that she has read in her journey. And we all know that even in our world, on the surface level, fairy tales have this jolly, lighthearted feel in their narrative. But if you take a closer look towards these fairy tales, we can see that there is a certain darkness in most of the fairy tales we know. And the anime shows us that not all stories end in a happy ending. And the supposedly happy stories that we do know have this creeping darkness somewhere, even though it seems happy on the surface. And this was further driven in by the story that immediately followed the flower story, which is the Bottle of Happiness story. The story goes like this. On her way to another country, Elena meets this boy Emil, who was storing the moments of happiness in a bottle so that he can cheer up Nino, the girl that he likes. And Elena, even though she can't remember how it ends, recalls a story about a magician that stored scenery with magic so that he can cheer up his bedridden wife. It sounds very similar, don't you think? Emil invites Elena for lunch, and she reluctantly agrees. Elena was greeted by Nino, who for some reason had messy clothes, And moments after, Emil's father, the mayor, shows up from the same room Nino came from, and this immediately raises a lot of red flags towards the audience. And to top it off, the mayor eyes Elaina until he sees the witch's brooch, showing him that he can't mess with her because she is a witch. These are subtle details, but it's enough to convey this awkward feeling in the room. And our suspicions were justified when Emil's father states that Nino is a slave that he bought from the east, and that Emil don't really care that she is a slave. And we can see this because Emil treats Nino with respect, opposed to his father, which I don't even want to know how he sees Nino. My god, this guy is creepy. Anyway, Nino accidentally breaks a pitcher, making Emil's father furious. And Elaina points the wand at Emil's father. And we as the audience sees hesitation in her face. She is weighing the fact that doing something to the mayor here will not help anyone, and she is reminded that she is just a traveler, and her role is not to meddle in other people's problems but to simply just observe. So she fixes the pitcher instead. And after the lunch incident, Elaina suggests to Emil that he should give the bottle of happiness to Nino, which he does. A vision of the other people's happiness results in Nino bursting into tears, and Emil comforts her. After this scene, we see Emil and Nino seeing off Elaina as she gets ready to depart. And as she is flying off the distance, we see Emil and Nino's shadows, but Emil is the only one waving, and this signals to the viewer something is off. And as soon as we felt that, Elaina remembers the ending to the story of the magician that stored the scenery for his wife. The ending to the story was that the scenery only despaired the wife even more, because she was shown something that she can never have again, and that led to her taking her own life. And this sent chills down my spine, and I realized that the tears that Nino shed could have been of despair, but we will never know because Elaina herself is too scared to find out. And she never returned to them again. This story alone was enough to forever change how I look at this anime. But that being said, the anime does not fully go dark, but rather just embrace the fact that the darkness could exist. But isn't that life? It's not always jolly, and sometimes we get hit by situations that are out of our control. I guess what the Journey of Elaina wants to convey here is that happiness, sadness, grief, and any other emotions or things that you experience are all part of the journey. And we shouldn't look away, but rather embrace it as an experience and move forward. Because we are all travelers in this journey we call life. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification icon for more contents like this. And I'll see you guys next time.